everybody. I get all kinds of emails. I get on these lists. I don't even know how I get on these lists. And I get emails both, for example, from the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. And I want to understand the Democrats. I really want to understand. I always like to hear from the side that I say I don't agree with, so I can learn more about them. I found, tremendous riches and wealth of knowledge and understanding, and the self-awareness and self-understanding by studying other religious views that are different than mine. Yet somehow the politics, every now and then you do hear intelligent arguments from the left, but for the most part it's emotional, it's dog whistles, there's no substance. It's just, Donald Trump is bad. The Republicans are bad. It's like, and it's so simplistic, and yet there are plenty of people who go into this, as opposed to on the Republican side. And also the Democrats are so self-righteous and so arrogant. They never do anything wrong. They're perfect. Part of the shock of Trump is to have a Republican who exhibits, or someone who ran as a Republican, because he's not a normal Republican. He actually is closer to the Democratic Party in many ways. We see that, like how he loves, Andrew Jackson, who was the first president of the modern Democratic Party, which took a radical, even though they claimed to be riding the coattails of Jefferson, they took a radical turn away from Jeffersonianism to Jacksonianism. It's a totally different approach, and to this day the Democratic Party remains the Republican, and as much as they claim that they are not, that's essentially who they are. I mean, they still idolize FDR, and they still idolize Wilson. And FDR was different, but Wilson was Jacksonian to the core. FDR had his issues, but he wasn't as much embroiled into the racism of the Democratic Party as even his own policies, though, were, but those were often against him. He was not a racist at his core the way Wilson and Jackson were. However, he had to follow party lines. For example, with the Japanese internment, which was a racist policy, and one of the darkest policies in 20th century America, although still echoing essentially Jackson's policies toward the indigenous peoples. And essentially they hide that, the left, behind, meaning they've traded slavery and Jim Crow for, welfare programs and so forth that have enslaved, based on race and so forth. Someone said to me, well, you've benefited from these programs. I was like, but that's not, almost really not by choice. That's by their design, and that's why I seek to vote against them, because it's not a benefit to have a lousy economy that destroys jobs, that forces people onto these programs, which is essentially the design of the left. abortion policies, so forth, are essentially lynching policies. The they're just lynching from the womb, essentially. That's not really what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about then is how they twist things, and the hypocrisy of their twists. If you point out how utterly George Soros is basically like Lex Luthor. He's like Darth Vader. He's like a comic book villain. Super in real life. I mean, that's the truth of who this man is. How utterly evil George Soros is. And if you pointed out, oh, you must be an anti-Semite because George Soros is quote-unquote Jewish. He's not Jewish because he's a heretic. I mean, he probably doesn't even fast on Yom Kippur. We're not talking about, a believer who's a sinner. We're talking about someone who's an utter heretic. And it's well known that I'm not a Zionist. But even Israel, which is so filled with heresy, see him as a villain. There's an irony of what's going on now there's been a series of posters against George Soros in his native Hungary. And there's this internal fight within Israel, within Israeli policy, these posters, this campaign, and so forth, as to whether or not this is anti-Semitic. The same thing. So I don't know. I got an email today from some left wing. They have these things where they're collecting signatures for. I think it was Credo was the name, and saying that Ivanka Trump should lose her security clearance because X, Y, and Z, even though it's very specious and very it holds no water what they're saying, and it's full of lies. Now, why can't we say that that's anti-Semitic? I mean, if criticizing, this is the way the left does it. Criticizing George Soros, criticizing the Rothschilds, criticizing anyone at the left who finds as a darling is anti-Semitic. Criticizing Obama, you're a racist. Criticizing Hillary Clinton, you're a sexist. How come criticizing Betsy DeVos is not sexist? How come criticizing Dr. Ben Carson is not racist? Oh, because they're Republicans, so you can't be racist or sexist against a Republican. You can't be the same thing. Ivanka Trump, you can't be anti-Semitic against a Republican because, well, if you're a Republican, you're not really black, you're not really a woman, you're not really a Jew. This is what they're going to say. When the fact of the matter is, Ivanka Trump is a million times more Jewish than what's their name, than George Soros or all these Hollywood quote-unquote Jews and all these people who don't even believe in God, fight against religion. This is a woman who does her best with many Shabbos and kosher and so forth in a very difficult situation, being a Makura of Lamanthus. And yet she and her husband are Meiser Nefesh tremendously for Torah. And this should be role models. But the thing is that the left ultimate goal of destroying all religion, which they've been doing from the inside, infiltrating. They've been doing through the culture. You know, I mean, it's fascinating. I remember some years ago there was a TV show in Long Island, The God Squad, and you had a Reform rabbi, but a pretty right-wing Reform rabbi, and a Catholic priest, and they were good friends, and they would sit and have conversations. And the fact of the matter is, I mean, this shows what I've said. You know, I remember in Jewish history class, they told us the following. You know, there were two translations of the Chumash into German. One was Mendelssohn and one was Rav Hirsch. And the difference was Mendelssohn wanted to teach the Chumash in German. And Rav Hirsch wanted to teach the German Jews Chumash. Same thing now. We've lost, you know, it's so interesting how many people say the X, Y, and Z battles we've lost. I've had people say, you know, the battle against Zionism was lost and it's not worth fighting. Whereas the fact of the matter there is against Zionism, the battle is for Torah. And when you have maybe a conservative Jewish background who has their Zionism, so you bring them Torah where Ma'aseh Usham within their understanding with Israel and whatever. If you are dealing with a secular college student who's looking for religion, who's looking for spirituality, but thinks there's nothing spiritual in Judaism precisely because of Zionism, precisely because of all these things. You know, it's like the story with many stories with the Dalai Lama, where, you know, there was a group of people, they came to Dalai Lama and they said, should we become Buddhists? And he said, no, you should find spirituality. And then there was one young woman who said, well, I'm stuck with, I'm Jewish, there's nothing spiritual there. And Dalai Lama said, well, that's because you don't know Judaism. And it's true, most Jews don't know Judaism. They know liberal things that have no spiritual, even, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if many people would get into their synagogues as they are today, maybe not as they were 50 years ago, when all spirituality was taken out, but now the Reform and the Conservative have learned from the Orthodox that they need spirituality. I mean, this is something that started in the late 60s, early 70s, and so forth. And the basic human need for spirituality, these people would find something spiritual in their lives. Now, maybe not as much as they would find in an authentic Torah place. But the thing is that these same people who will preach to me that we've lost the battle of Zionism and it's not worth fighting, will fight very strong against egalitarianism. And I understand the fight against egalitarianism, but there has to be reflection on how to fight these battles. Meaning, what is our issue? You know, there was a schism, a rather small schism in the conservative the mainline conservative movement, which embraced for the most part egalitarianism, and the Union for Traditional Judaism, which did not embrace egalitarianism. schism. What is the issue? Is it in form or is it belief? I think there's a reason why we are labeled the Orthodox and not merely the Orthoprax. The main crux, to me, of Judaism, even though a lot of people will disagree with me, but essentially, what issues does the Torah give us to say that you're not a Ben Olam Haba, that you lost your share in the world to come? Are issues generally of orthodoxy and not orthopraxy. Now, orthodoxy does insist on orthopraxy, does teach, but it's as a matter of doctrine, first and foremost, meaning, although there are issues of practice which we will say someone loses their Jewish identity, there's a great deal of argument over that, over which do these apply today. Were those the issues in their time, meaning in earlier days, if a Jew was a Machal Shabbos before Hesia, if he openly desecrated the Sabbath, he was making a statement that he has nothing to do with the Jewish people. Today, meaning he is raised. What is this? What is this that we call a Tinok Shenishba? Someone was upset at me that on a public forum there was a question: why do Jewish atheists identify themselves as Jewish? And I said I wish they didn't, because Judaism is a religion and not a race, in my book. I was humble enough to say this is not what all Jews believe, but this is just my own personal feeling. And an older rabbi, he questioned me and he said, how can you put such a thing on a public forum? And my answer basically is, how could I not put such a thing on a public forum? I mean, we suffer as Jews from anti-Semitism at the hands, I don't like the term anti-Semitism, but a fight against Torah, mostly at the hands of these self-hating Jews. But more than that is, and the thing is, because and I'm not saying Reform conservative are not Jewish, and then the Orthodox answer, the standard Orthodox answer is going to be, well, some of them are and some of them aren't, because, the Reform, they accept patrilineal descent and they don't require conversion and this and that, and their conversions are no good, and then the conservative, well, maybe their conversions are good, maybe they're not good, blah, blah, blah. And we're not getting at the core of these issues. We're talking about symptoms and not talking about the cause. What essentially we have to talk about is, well, most Jews today that don't go to Orthodox synagogues grew up with egalitarianism. Is there some way we can accommodate them in a halachic way, but that they should still be that they should adopt orthodoxy, even if their praxy is not strictly orthopraxy, but it is within the realms of halacha, because so much of our current orthopraxy is not halachic, but it's minhag. Even if it's established minhag that we, for example, with issues of egalitarianism, that's already minhag that comes from the time of Chazal, so it's very strong. This is a question we have to face with all kinds of issues within the Jewish community. Right now is the 9 days, the 3 weeks, and many people assume or brand. These laws of mourning that we customarily observe at this time, and we should do so. I'm not saying to change your practice. This is not an issue of praxis, because indeed we should keep our minhagim. I'm not saying not to keep minhagim, but we should know where they come from. We should know why we keep them. We should know what the arguments are for them. We should not disparage those who have a different minhag. I remember some years ago, a friend of mine was outraged. How could it be that the kosher meat restaurants are open during the 9 days? And then he asked, and he looked into it, and the answer that he received was, some of these traditional Israelis might go and eat treif if they don't have access to meat. Meaning the restaurants, a lot of the restaurants are open the 9 days but sell other products, and some of them they sell meat. And so why are they selling meat? And the answer is that there's no halacha that you can't eat meat during the 9 days. It's only Erev Tisha B'Av, that last meal, that there's a halacha from Chazal that we have in the Mishnah not to eat meat. Everything else is a minhag. There are minhagim not to eat meat for the whole 3 weeks, but we don't see and it's in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch like that. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch mentions both. I mean, not that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is a source, but it's something that people look to. It's in some ways it's more of a Musar sefer than it is a sefer of halacha, although it brings halacha, but it presents it in the al derech Musar more than al derech tucked in. And it's good al derech Musar to adopt certain practices and so forth that might help you keep halacha. There are different pathways within Torah, but we have to recognize what's what, why, how, everything, all these things. Learn what is the actual halacha, and when you have something like this, like the questions of egalitarianism, certain things we cannot change. Edus. That's very clearly established halacha that Edus Isha Psula. So you can't have a woman be an aid kedushin. You can't have a woman be an aid for a get and so forth. The reason why many contemporary poskim have fought against egalitarianism, it's clear. It's because egalitarianism meant reform. The same way why 150 years ago, if you gave a sermon in the vernacular, that meant reform, and today only certain, very traditional Haredi shuls have this musa of not speaking the vernacular, meaning even so, giving a sermon in Yiddish, I heard, was at one time not even accepted. That seems strange to me that they actually gave the sermons in Lashon HaKodesh. I'm not so sure if that's true. That might be a lie that the Zionim made up to promote Ivrit. It would make sense that they did give sermons in Yiddish all throughout history, but all throughout the history of Yiddish, whatever it is, we all that's a side point now. But the thing is when eventually the Orthodox shuls started giving sermons in English. Why? Because they realized this is not a halachic issue. This is and they're going to lose everybody. And I'm not saying that Orthodox shuls have to have egalitarian values or practices, because there should be the same thing. There's a reason why there are certain Haredi shuls where the drasha has to be in Yiddish, and that's for them. But the thing is that they don't say that, for the most part, that the shuls that have their sermons in English are wrong. They say just this is the minhag of this shul, and the same thing. I think we should recognize that if there are egalitarian Orthodox shuls which follow a psak from their particular rabbonim that are different than ours, we can recognize it as such, that this is just a different derech. It's not our derech, but it could be kosher as long as otherwise halacha hashkafa is proper. I mean, you have Shabbos and kashrus and taras and mishpacha and all these things, and a belief in Torah Sinai, which is essentially really the crux of the issue, is Torah Sinai and the other Yud Gimel Ikrim. That's the main issue we have to have with the conservative movement, is this question of Torah Sinai, this question of the Piskei Din of the Sanhedrin and so forth. And more they've gone away from that, although there are two sides. All right, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. You will.